Hello, viewers, and welcome to Political Currents, the show that brings you comprehensive coverage of our nation's political landscape. I'm your host, Rashid Oniagi. And as usual, in this program, we dive deep into the heart of Nigeria's politics, bringing you the latest updates, insightful analysis, and in-depth discussions on the issues that matter to you. In each edition, we'll be joined by political leaders, policy experts, and the voices of everyday Nigerians as we explore the currents that shape our political discourse. We'll tackle the tough questions, challenge the status quo, and strive to understand the complexities of our diverse and dynamic political environment. So sit back, relax, and let's navigate the currents of Nigeria's politics together. Welcome to Political Currents. And today, we will be touching on the issue of youth. That vital asset that we have in Nigeria that probably we don't know what to do with it. And it is a fact that the youth constitute one of the most vital resources of any nation. They are the youngest, the most vibrant, the most creative segment of the population. And to the extent that a country utilizes its youthful population for productive purposes, you can be sure that that country will develop and develop in the right direction. Recently, we've been in the news, we've been playing witness to what is happening in Kenya. And in my research and in my contact with friends and especially on the social media, the whole space is abuzz with what is happening in Kenya, the so-called Genz protests. And what is it about, really? And before I even go there, most people want to compare it with what happened in 2020, which is the NSAS protest, which was a very, very significant watershed in the relationship that the youth has with the society in Nigeria. And in Kenya, it was about a tax bill that was to be deliberated by Parliament. And the youths of Kenya were against it. And of course, you know Kenya has political opposition, so you cannot rule out that there is a connection between the entire youth population that were critical to the protest and the opposition politicians. I saw Raila Odinga visiting or attending the funeral of some of the youths that were killed during that protest. But let's leave that aside. This is Nigeria. That was Kenya. But to the extent that Nigerians began to look at what is happening in Kenya as a template for what might happen in Nigeria, that makes it a significant event for the youth of Nigeria. And don't forget, Nigeria is one of the most youthful nations in Africa, if not the entire world. More than 60% of our population are between the age of 18 and 35. And that is significant data that we must be mindful of. Also, Nigeria has a critical amount of youth unemployment. In the last count, it was about 23%. And that is also significant. Also, we have a situation of the economy that has put a lot of burden on ordinary Nigerians. Of course, by ordinary Nigerians, we don't even know what that means again. It is probably if you are not at the upper class, you are just an ordinary Nigerian. So, but let me not belabor the issue. I have with me tonight a guest who is going to discuss this issue with me, and his name is Mr. Julius Oga. He's a journalist and he works with the Blueprint Leadership newspapers. I'm sorry. Well,
I was in Blueprint at
yes,
some point.
he was in Blueprint. So you've moved around and you've taken it quite. You are familiar with you have your hand on the pulse of the nation, I should say. We still feed off the print media in Nigeria, even the television media, the electronic media that we operate, still feed off, because the print media represents the primary source sometimes of our news. So much so that if you are very observant, you will see most TV stations merely regurgitating the news that has already been printed in the newspapers. Welcome to the program, Mr. Julius.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes, I didn't want to take the word out of your mouth, but it's not gainsaying to say that you are youthful.
That's a compliment.
No, not a
The
compliment.
looks are deceptive.
Well, I don't want to carry that beyond the scope of this program to say, okay, well, maybe we don't really have more than 60% youth in Nigeria because the looks are deceptive. But of course, you are quite aware of what has been happening in Kenya and the tendency for Nigerians to draw parallels between Kenya and Nigeria. And that is very, very important. I was on the social media today, and somebody was basically making a veiled threat that Bola should listen to what is happening in Kenya. By Bola, he meant the president, of course. Now, tell me, what exactly were your impressions when you saw what is happening in Kenya, especially with regards to these Gen Z protests?
Yeah, my impression is, again, is one of the spin-off effects of the social media. Gen Z are very adept with social media. They rally there seamlessly, and what they rally on social media is manifesting on the streets of Nairobi and other cities in Kenya. You, in your introductory opening comment, you referenced October 2020 when something similar happened in Nigeria, which was the NSAS protest. You know, they rallied on social media and it manifested on the streets. So the power of influencers, the power of politicians to tap the currents from the of these influencers on the youth and impressionable youth for that matter is very, very significant. So what I have seen in Kenya is quite dangerous, I must say. As at yesterday, the Kenyan Commission of Human Rights, National Commission of Human Rights of Kenya, has reported about 39 deaths from this protest and about 361 injuries. I believe an update of the situation, because already the youths were rallying again for Tuesday. An update of this situation may indicate higher casualty figures. It's a democratic space and young people feel free, but they should give the law enforcement and government a chance. They shouldn't take laws into their hands. Protest is a democratic right, but to the extent to which it is exercised within the bounds of not breaching public peace and causing violence. So,
but it seems to me that the focus of the youth in Kenya was actually getting that tax bill repealed, and the president has reacted accordingly and has actually withdrawn the tax bill, or he first proposed a reduction, and then the tax bill itself was withdrawn. If I think I'm getting it right.
The tax bill,
but that didn't stop the protest.
Yes, the tax bill was just like in 2020 when the federal government, as a panic reaction, immediately prescribed SARS. It didn't stop the protest.
Yes, it didn't.
So, in a similar way, the president has refused to sign or withheld his signature to the tax bill in order, because fundamentally it is the basis and foundation for the protests. So the president's withholding of accent to it is also if you like, a political mature way of trying to calm the youth's anger and all of that, but it hasn't. It always shows that there are subterranean influences on these impressionable young minds. Their temperament is that is driven. They are always driven towards action, and a lot of them, may not pause to think, lack the critical power of analysis to know that what they are doing at this point in time has implications beyond what they are expecting. If the tax bill if the president has withheld his accent in response to popular reaction from the young population, then it is on the part of the leaders to whom these people listen to also persuade them to not, go the way of violence, like setting the parliament fire. I mean, breaching security and breaking into the parliamentary building and destroying property is going.
But I do believe they also have a precedent. One of the first things you said was that this was this was a protest that germinated from the social media.
Yes.
And basically, we've seen what happened in the U.S. In 2020, vis-a-vis the crowd at the Capitol building. Even closer home here, we have seen what happened in Lekki, at the Lekki Gate in the NSAS protest and across the country, with youth breaking prisoners free from their jailhouses, with them burning public buildings and public property. There was anger.
There was.
And it gives this impression that the tax bill was merely a trigger for a more insidious discontent that the people have against the governance. Now, one thing we have observed in governance across Africa is the tendency towards ostentation as far as the leaders are concerned. And that tends to give you an impression that the leaders, even though they were elected by the same youth, once they get to that position of power, they pretty much forget. You will remember the famous clip of one of our fellow journalists, Seun Okinbaloye, interviewing a National Assembly member about the issue of the jeeps, and that one telling with a lot of confidence that how can he buy Nigerian-made jeep when before he gets to his village, his car will have been spoiled by a road that he supposed to have fixed. And it's almost arrogant. And the fact that even before Ruto withdrew the bill, the protest had gone beyond simple, please don't protest. The youth simply wouldn't have anything else. And when he found himself facing a national revolt, he now did what they did. And that tends to fuel the confidence of the youth that, okay, we got him to back down. Maybe we can get him to actually leave office. Now the cry is Ruto must go.
Ruto must go! Ruto must go! Ruto must go! Ruto must go! Ruto must go!
Don't forget also that in 2020 at some point it was Buhari must go. At some point of the NSAS protest, it tended towards that. Yeah. Now, these are subterranean influences coming into what is supposed to be a legitimate protest. Those subterranean influences are political and they are dangerous. The Kenyan and Nigerian dynamics are very, very similar. Yeah. Kenya, a multicultural society, not as varied as Nigeria is. Kenya with a youth bulge, with unemployment crisis, Nigeria with a bigger youth bulge, unemployment crisis, and all of these. Now, all of these are going to influence something. And when government breaches trust, when government consistently, politicians only remember their constituents when it's time for elections. Once elections are contested and won and results are announced, politicians move to the state capital or to the national capital and only will return home this time around, not not men of the people as they are during elections, but they are returning this time around with security guards, with
sirens,
with no personal contact with the men on the streets. Now, this provides a trigger. The people can't be on the streets and see the way the politicians are living large, and then the people are struggling to survive. And you don't expect that there will be no repercussions. It cannot continue to be so. At some point, something has got to give. But it has to be in a manner that I'm afraid when such a thing happens in Nigeria, it takes different colorations, which is why it could happen elsewhere and people could get away with it. When it happens in Nigeria, it turns into something else.
Okay, let's dive deeper now. Okay, I will generally regard what you just said as a surface analysis. It's something that is empirical. The perception of the people is that, okay, if I elect you and you get there, they know the condition of this representative before they become representatives, and when they get there, you can hardly even see them. So this tells me that even the concept of representation, as is not fully understood. And if we are talking about the dynamics, there is a fundamental disconnect between the people and their representative, in a way that the grievances of the people usually does not get acted upon, because the legislature are peopled by individuals who feel that, having gotten to the legislature, they have a different perspective on things. They now say, oh, okay, it's not just about building roads, it's not about anything. First, let's settle ourselves. Let's act like legislators and the big men and politicians that we are, and then the people can go to help. But what I want to ask is that, do you think this situation itself is as a result of the cultural incompatibility of the system of government we have chosen? Because there's quite a similarity between the Kenyan system and the Nigerian system. Okay, there is a cultural incompatibility between the way we see power, the way we relate to power as a people, and the way we are being forced to relate now, such that the grievances of the people never actually get addressed to, and the moment you complain, you are regarded as an enemy, and the first thing they try to do is shut you down. Do you even think the system, the democratic system that we so much revere, is actually appropriate for addressing the fundamental problems that we have as a people?
Wow, this question is so broad, I don't even know where to start addressing it from. But let me even start from the concept of
I'm simply asking, where does the problem spring from? The youth we are talking about are largely educated.
Yeah.
They understand. If they have, you can't function on the social media without actually having a little bit of savvy, if not education. But basically, we have a situation here where, they don't agree with the system. They want simply to overthrow the system without even suggesting an alternative. And it's happening all over.
And I beg to add that it's a dangerous precedent. The rule of the mob is what it will tend towards, and no longer the rule of representation. And if you look at Kenya and Nigeria, we are both former British colonies.
Yes.
We both inherited the parliamentary system of government from the British.
Yes.
Over close to 70 years after, India is still a parliamentary state. India also was a British colony. In Africa, I'm trying to now answer the cultural connection of it. In Africa, Kenya has never experienced a military coup, unlike Nigeria, which had a series back-to-back incidences of coups. We've had situations where People want absolute authority. The parliamentary system of government allows for proportional representation and concentrates both executive and political legislative powers in the hands of parliament. So members of parliament are also cabinet ministers. And the prime minister is the leader of the party and the head of government. And the president is simply a ceremonial figure. That system we inherited from Britain. That system which India practices saves the cost of governance. Will save you the situation where you have to pay ministers and you have to pay in Nigeria 350 members of the House of Representatives and 119 senators or 190 something senators. I'm sorry, I'm mixing the figures up.
Nice.
Some ways.
It's 90 senators, I believe,
Yes,
93 or something.
thereabouts.
Yeah.
Senators. So you have a National Assembly that is populated by over 400 individuals, and you have a cabinet structure that is made by occupied by a different set of people, and you have an all-powerful president who brooks no opposition, who has every authority and everything concentrated in his hands. This is what we do whenever this is what Africans did to a very large extent. Every African who came in as a prime minister ended up amending the constitution and assuming the powers of a president. We saw how Robert Mugabe became like an emperor until somehow Zimbabweans had to just find a way to just shove him aside.
Yeah, but
that thinking that I want to be the sole authority, I want to have everything under control, which is like an inherent character in the black man, is one of the reasons why we are having leaders who dominate authority and care not much about what is happening on the streets or how the people are living.
But if you are talking about the inherent character of the African leader to want to stay in power, okay, what about the inherent character of the African person, like a subject, inherent character of the African subject, to not fully understand his position and his relationship with the leader in a fashion that will allow him to engage positively with leadership in order to bring about change? Why always protest all the time? Because I use our own country as an example. The first question I ask people when they start to complain about government, this government, that, is, do you know where your local government chairman is? Do you know where your representative is? Do you even know which constituency you reside in? Do you know you have access, you have a right to go to this guy and say, this is what I think of what is being done here? Do our representatives even have constituency offices where people can reach out to them and say, this is what we want? There doesn't seem to be that, because the representatives simply forget about the people the moment they get there, and the people themselves say, oh, this man is too big for me, he don't become big man, let me just leave him alone. And then when you talk to people, all of them start shouting, Tinubu, Tinubu, Tinubu. The fact of the matter is, we are in Abuja, there is a minister, there are senators, there are municipal, local council chairmen, ward councillors, who are the go-to guys when you are trying to develop from the ground up. Is it that, yes, the African leadership may want to stay forever in power, but does the African individual, citizen, subject actually understand his relationship within the context of the system we operate?
Political education in our society has remained very, very poor.
Yes, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Political education.
Yes, self-enlightenment also has remained very, very poor. And we are very direly in need of heroes to look up to. We are, and that is the point at
Heroes?
which, yes, I mean, people, when I say heroes, I mean in the context of people who represent a social conscience of the society, people you look up to
Yes.
and want to emulate, not necessarily because they are wealthy, but because there is value in their personality and in the lives they lead. If we look back in the not too distant past, we've had leaders of this character. But as we continue to grow, we have tended more and more towards materialism. And the quest to get rich makes us sacrifice value for money. So a lot of the time, we are looking at how to get money, and at whatever price you get that money, morality does not count. Your social conscience, your individual your individual principle as a person who should not, who lives consciously and is alive to the fact that, okay, it is not moral to do certain things, is totally absent. And the more people have tended towards the struggle for power, the more they have deadened that questioning, self-questioning that makes you sit back and ask yourself, is this thing I am doing, is it right? Like the Rotarians will say, is it beneficial to everybody? That ought to be the goal of leadership, that it is beneficial to everybody, it serves everybody right, there is a general sense of equity and satisfaction, and people will go to bed. You don't have to be a millionaire in every society, but where there is equity, where leadership is conscious of the fact that they owe people a social responsibility for society to be morally upright and for things to be correct, at least to even have basic services, there the tendency towards social agitation is not as significant as it is. And if you look at Nigeria's, for instance, we're talking about Kenya, if you look at Nigeria, Niger Delta region, you will discover that the Niger Delta states earn 13% derivation from, they have a development commission, they have federation account allocations, even
a ministry dedicated.
They have a ministry, and then you look around you and you wonder, what are these people doing? What are the political class, the leadership these people have selected done to ensure that these people have as basic an amenity as potable drinking water, as basic an amenity as a primary health care center? If you go to those states, you weep, and what you hear is a hype,
but
a hype that flatters to
not
deceive the
because,
outside world.
like I said before, the people themselves don't know what they are entitled to.
So the people now, instead of rallying together and saying fairness for everybody, form cliques or form cabals that either pick up arms to fight for their own share of the bread, or to destroy everything, or to ensure that the politicians, the political authorities negotiate with them and give them their own quota. And then the man who cannot carry a gun, the man who just lives by himself, is abandoned to his own means. These are what stir protests significantly in most societies. When in Nigeria, we've been fortunate. Our diversity is like a valve, the valve that lets out air. So before a protest can actually generate into a national movement, ethnic and religious and tribal colorations come to divide the drive. And then before you know, people are fighting each other. Okay, you're protesting against the president because he's my brother. You're protesting against his governor because he's not from your region.
That leads me to a conclusion that a fellow journalist wrote in his article.
Okay.
It's Olagunju Lasisi, that I think perhaps he's trying to actually create the impression is calling attention to the powerlessness of Nigerians to change the dynamics of their suffering. as a way of galvanizing them to actually say, no, we are not powerless. Okay? But political action for change is a very, very precise science in which you have to know where to attack the problem. Now, and now I'm talking about how solutions. How can Nigerians reorient themselves to seeing themselves as change agents, but not necessarily agents that will solve problems on the street? And that circles back to our initial discussion about structure itself. The structure itself does not permit the ordinary guy an avenue to address or to complain about the things that he does not like about governance. And there are very, very few channels in Nigeria, except perhaps the social media. You know, you have a public complaints commission that does not function. Most people in Abuja would rather go to Brekete family than go and complain at ICPC or FCCPC or Public Complaint Commission, or even come to a radio station or anywhere to complain, or go to their local government chairman. Okay, it seems we keep going around in circles. That okay, government comes up with an initiative like all these palliatives that the Tinubu government is providing, which hardly touches the surface of the people suffering. We are still arguing about minimum wage and the rest of it. How do we change the dynamics so that the Nigerian youth doesn't wake up one day and say, let's do like Kenya, without actually knowing where things will end up? Because the protest is simply for protest's sake. It is not to change anything. And from what I can see of the Kenyan people, they didn't quite understand what next to do once Ruto withdrew the bill. Now they say, okay, this can happen so easily. The guy has withdrawn the bill. Now, let's demand for his removal. Now, Ruto set up something like a national consultative committee, which the youth also rejected to participate in. So there's this whole nihilism about the youth of Africa that see themselves as agents of change, but they do not understand how to bring change about. Is this the same thing you will say about Nigerian youth, especially with the hindsight of NSAS?
Yeah, there's so much similarity with comparing what is happening in Kenya right now with how NSAS evolved and how it ended. It ended tragically, and at some point, remember, the movement had no leadership.
Yes.
Or identifiable leadership, even though there were influencers hidden in the background. And in Kenya too, what I am seeing, there are some political juggernauts in Kenya, especially some members of the former dynasties, two prominent dynasties, who didn't want Ruto, who called himself a hustler,
Kenyatta and Odinga,
and who are political heavyweights that can actually influence things without their hands being seen. They can want to actually set Ruto, the former vice president, on his toes and by keeping the youth on the streets. And the youth will end up themselves just being, weapons used and dumped. They've gotten to a point of the protest, and like you rightly observed, they don't know what more to do. In Nigeria, the dynamics of our society is such that should such happen, my fear is always a protest will end up being the sort that is taken over by anger, that is taken over by crime, and before you know it, there are fires burning, there are warehouses being broken into because of the hunger in the land. Many of the people on the streets, the youths, there are so many youths on the streets that may not understand what is happening, but that when they hear we no go agree, are like, okay, now is the time to go to that shop and take that phone I've been looking at and take it by force. And now is the time to go to that warehouse. That was what happened to NSAS. And then there will be criminals who will be thinking, okay, now is the time to free my friend and to take advantage of this storm. And that is the anonymity in a mob. A mob has no rationale. A mob just acts on impulse. And the impulse of a mob is very, very dangerous. And you cannot see where it will end. And we cannot afford that at this point in time. No matter how the hunger goes, I think some policies are meant to actually bring about positive change. If we sit down and actually try to understand the dynamics of those policies, they are for the long-term good. For a long time, Nigerians have not experienced the kind of hardship we are experiencing now.
Yes.
It is not because they were not there, it was because we kept shifting the goalpost. So at what point are we going to make the sacrifice that countries we always refer to as the Asian tigers made? They, at some point, for a long time, Malaysia and Singapore were not democracies.
Yes.
They were ruled by dictators who made sure they put everything that makes a functional society in place.
I don't like the direction of your.
They put those things in place.
Well, are you suggesting we should do this in Nigeria?
I am not suggesting we should do that. I am thinking that at some point we need a leadership that gets things to work.
How can that happen?
And not a leadership that is popular.
How can that happen in a society where leaders are actually elected based on popularity and not on their integrity? Because a lot of what is being said about the current crop of leadership is that they are not worthy because they are questionable morality and all.
That's the fallacy of democracy.
But let's go on a short break. When we come back, we'll dive deeper into the very structure of our morality and see how we can use that to actually effect or to bring about change in the country. Well, viewers, I've been talking to Mr. Julius Oga, and you will agree with me. His comments have been quite interesting, and whether or not we go the way of Kenya is still open to question. But after having gone through NSAS, and we saw how it ended, is it the proper channel? But we really haven't developed a proper channel to get the people's grievances to those who need to address it. But we'll talk about all that when we come back from this short break. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. And you're still watching Rapid TV, and the program is Political Currents. And I'm still your host, Rashid Oniagi. You can always connect with us on the social media. And we are also on the Star Times platform and the Nightcomsat free-to-air platform. And we've been talking about the events in Kenya and the implications they have for countries like Nigeria, because there are so many parallels between Kenya and Nigeria. And they also have a youthful population, not as much as we have. And the same kind of problems that they have is also here in Nigeria, also to a completely different degree, even to a higher degree. But the social dynamics in Nigeria are slightly different. Nigeria is far more diverse than Kenya, but diversity is common to both countries. And they also operate parliamentary systems of government, whether it is a British model or an American model. They have very, very close similarities to bicameral legislature, and also they have a president and all that. And what has been happening in the past few days in Kenya, gives us an opportunity to reflect on our own situation and why we cannot and should not get to the point where our youth, who constitutes the greater proportion of our population, will go on the street and get themselves killed, loot, and yet, at the end of the day, the problem will still be there. Is it necessary? Is it proper? Or have we kind of missed the road on how to effect the best change that will move us forward? And the person who has been discussing it with me has been Mr. Julius Organ. Well, let's go back to where we were before we went on break. Now, we've talked about cultural values. Now, let's talk about value system. Okay? Most of us had British education. Okay? Most of us adopted the religious values, Western religious values and everything. But when we look across our borders, the West itself is beginning to experience a crisis of value, to the point where people don't even know how to refer to themselves. I'm referring to this woke culture where somebody says, I'm not a he, I'm not a she, you know, and all that.
Something in between.
Something in between, you know. It's a permissive culture, liberal culture that has eaten very, very deep into our still existing traditional cultures. And there is a clash somewhere. And there is a kind of, you know, I won't call it interaction. You know, we are still struggling between accepting the liberal culture that says anything goes as long as you are free, and the traditional culture that is grounded on ancient laws and ancient mores, you know. So there is this kind of psychic conflict between the average African, I'm not just talking about Nigeria now, who is caught between his traditional culture and the new Western culture. And this manifests itself in the political structure too, as a reverence for leadership, okay, and a sense of passivity, not a sense of entitlement, that has made people not even to be interested in what the Constitution says about their rights. So a policeman can go because he's wearing a uniform. The king can say, yes, I'm the king and I have power over life and death. You know, you can say because you want to do Oro festival, all the women should pack out of the street. They should not see them on the street and all that. You know, do you think we need actually derive our leadership model from our traditional base, which would suggest what you said about Singapore, a dictator? In the African context, a military dictator. Or in the democratic context, a one-party state that is not strictly dominated by one person, the kind I think China probably has, you know, where there is a system whereby leaders come up, but they don't become dictator, essentially speaking. You know, do you think our culture can provide us with clues as to how to restructure the system we have inherited from the British and from the Americans in order to create our own unique system that responds better to our aspirations as a people?
Yes, that's a very, very fundamental question, and it strikes really deep at the heart of some of the crises, social crises we are having in our society today. Because the world was not meant to be uniform, and peoples are not meant to be uniform. That's why we have different climates and different races and different colors of people and different languages and different cultures across the world. What we are trying to adopt is tending towards uniformity, and uniformity in itself is monotonous. So we can't be uniform. We can't be uniform just in only one aspect. If the whole world was made up of white or black people, then we could think that, okay, it was meant to be uniform. That's why we're so. And it is not the case. We have white people, we have yellow people, we have red people, we have black people, and all of them. There are subcultures in cultures. So tending towards uniformity has become a crisis, a living and present danger for all human races, and is also leading to the loss of moral values amongst many people that you referred to. So, and I tell you, some of our folks who have emigrated, who have jackbad and are living abroad, I've seen quite a couple of them on social media telling us that the danger the future portends is that children will grow up not knowing, with a crisis of identity.
Yes.
Here back at home, we still have a little bit of discipline where our society allows your individuality to be subsumed within the larger cultural context of where you come from.
Yeah.
And then we move from here and go there, and then we face the cultural shock of liberalism.
So tribalism is not necessarily a bad thing.
Well, tribalism, in the sense of which it is that
Oh,
I am my tribe,
yes,
you are
I am
your
my-
tribe,
yes.
it's not a bad thing. It's diversity. Now, tribalism in the sense of nepotism, where I now distance myself from you because you're your tribe,
And you're not my
and
tribe.
then I draw closer to another person because he's my tribe, that is when negativity sets in.
But isn't it inevitable that if you have different tribes jostling for the same position, the man that wins will always favor his tribe?
Exactly the point. So at some point we were cultural, empires. The British Empire started from somewhere, and then this desire for expansion is what led to the desire for expansion. If it had a positive, if it didn't have the underlying tone of commerce and business and religious expansion with it, if it had the goal of let these people come under the rulership of a state that is, let's say, under the guidance of a leader who is like a philosopher king, who is called, who is naturally born, society would have developed differently. Remember, we came from an era of kings and emperors.
Yes.
Those kings and emperors were spiritual leaders of their society as well as political leaders, all
yes.
concentrated in one person.
One person.
And then that person had the wisdom to appoint who will do this, who will do that, and everybody subsumed themselves to his authority. Then we came to a point where we now had to select people to rule. And then we fell for the woes of those who have money, or who can control the crowd, or who can control the forces that can take power by subterranean means. And the quest for power became the dominating objective of leadership, not the quest for equity and good governance.
I don't want to get too much into political philosophy, but
Yes.
what you seem to be suggesting is that it would be a good idea for us to, at least in the context of the so-called restructuring that Nigerians have been talking about, to scale back and resolve ourselves into more manageable chunks in terms of administrative structures. Okay?
I guess you're referring to regionalism again.
I'm referring to what is already there, geopolitical zones.
Okay.
Which, in the wisdom of the people who invented the word, and I think this word, this coinage became quite common during the reign of Abacha. And Abacha literally enshrined the 6th geopolitical zone into the constitution, the 1992 constitution that never saw the light of day.
1996.
96, I'm sorry. Now, that constitution created the idea of geopolitical zones as economic, political economic units that are autonomous in the sense that they have their own leadership, one vice president for each
zone.
for each zone. And each zone, now you have a rotating presidency at the top that circles between all the 6 geopolitical zones. But when Abacha died and we didn't adopt that constitution, the geopolitical zone became a nebulous concept with which we organize our politics without it even having any grounding in the present constitution that we operate. You will not find a single statement making references to the 6 geopolitical zone in this constitution that we have. Yet, we use it as the operative principle of political organization in Nigeria and not economic organization.
We've come a long way down the road. And if you asked me, Abacha would have been in the best position to implement all those ideas, well-considered ideas that were put together into the 1996 Constitution. It happens, and I often say this, that all, apart from the regions, the 4 regions before 1966,
Yes.
it happens that all the states that have been created, the dissolution of the regions into a unitary state, the creation of 12 states, and subsequently 19 and then 21 were all done by military decree. Now, if we want to do this in the present circumstance, it is going to cause a cataclysmic discussion and destruction. Because right there in parliament, every parliamentarian is going to want his own state.
Yes.
So every local government chairman will want to be the governor of a state, and every local government wants to become a state. Every ward wants to become a local government, and that is not practicable. So going back into the regions is like a dissolution of the states, and we are a complex amalgamation of so many different people within one state. So you will now have a situation which I fear will lead to brother fighting brother because of land bond. Either the boundaries we say are drawn by pencil, or the boundaries that exist in the sand that are imaginary. So we are actually trading. Everybody has his own understanding of what he thinks restructuring is. So we have to actually define what restructuring means,
so how do we
understand it, and before we even think of.
So how do we avoid the same situation that has happened in Kenya, the same situation that has happened with NSAS? How do we prevent these situations from repeating themselves in a way that even the Nigerian youth, though we have a law that actually gives them a stake in governance, but if governance itself is already more or less corrupted and cannot work for the interest of the majority of Nigerians, the youth themselves, we eventually become co-opted into a system that does not work for them when they grow up. Is this, are we simply going to perpetuate this cycle of poverty, underdevelopment, protests, anger, and all that?
We're stuck in a situation that we have to work ourselves back up. They say if you find yourself in a hole, you stop digging. We haven't stopped digging. We need to get to a point of self-consciousness. Some level of morality has to come back to us. Some level of that self-sacrifice. Some level of not having that sense of entitlement, that I am entitled to good things. One of the biggest challenges I find in our society today, especially with the youth, is this huge sense of entitlement.
But aren't they entitled to good governance?
They are entitled to good governance, but they are also entitled to taking responsibility. You see, power is not given to anybody. It's not given to you. You take it. At some point in the history of this country, it was ruled by youth.
Isn't that what they are trying to do?
Look back. Yes. Look back in time. You would see from Nnamdi Azikiwe through Obafemi Awolowo, through Tafawa Balewa, through Ahmadu Bello, through to Shehu Shagari, through Maitama, they were all young people.
Okay.
Chinua Achebe wrote Things Fall Apart at the age of 28.
Wow.
The dynamics of that time are significantly different today, you would argue. But then, there is a level of you taking account of your circumstance at this moment and putting your head down, putting your heart, you don't have to be in government to do what is right.
Okay.
You don't have to be in government to control.
I think we can go on and on about this.
Yes, we can go.
Unfortunately, run out of time. I would like you just in 30 seconds. What advice will you give to the Nigerian youth right now?
Please, what is happening in Kenya is not a good thing. And we should by no means allow ourselves to be deceived to think that we could do that here and get the same result. No, we are not the same society. We don't have the same dynamics. And there are people waiting, opportunities to take advantage, to perpetrate it. Some people have lost power, but have thought that because it is not their way, it should be the highway.
Okay.
So we should be careful.
All right. Okay, viewers, that's it. You've had my guest, Mr. Julius Oga, with his advice. There's so much we can say about this, and perhaps we will approach this matter from a different angle, because it has raised a lot of issues about governance, about political structure, about relationships, and all that. And these are important in order to have progress in any society. The understanding that the youth have about their society and who's responsible for their situation is as important as what they must do to change the situation for the better, not simply to destroy what is already there. I have no advice to give other than the one he has already given, but we'll watch and see what is happening in Kenya, and we will look within ourselves and see how we can prevent that kind of thing from happening here, and also to create a better space for human development in Nigeria. Well, this is where we're going to wrap it up for tonight. Please just join us next week on this program, Political Currents, for another interesting topic that relates to our political development and our political dynamics. My name is Rashid Oniagi, and thank you for watching us. Good night.